Welcome to Tech Orbit. Enjoy this super video and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones.
On today's episode, we're getting into the latest space news, including Dream Chaser is finally ready for launch. New details for Starship flight test. Number 3, and Europe has a problem with their Vega rocket. This is the space race. You can add the Dream Chaser spaceplane to the list of new vehicle launches in the first quarter of 2024 as the small shuttle-like orbiter and its shooting Star Cargo Module have begun final preparations at Neil Armstrong Testing Facility in Ohio. The announcement of the vehicle's arrival on November 30th by creator Sierra Space marked the beginning of the last group of trials for their vehicle, which has been in development since 2010. The Neil Armstrong Test Facility is where NASA ensures prototype vehicles have the fortitude to withstand the rigors of space travel. From launch all the way to the heat of re-entry, the 6,400-acre site is home to some of the largest simulation equipment in the world, and it's all used to see if a new spaceship is ready for use in orbit. In the case of the Dream Chaser, the almost 30-foot-long Tenacity cargo variant will be stacked in a launch configuration, which includes the 15-T-long Shooting Star cargo module. While connected, both vehicles will undergo environmental testing in the facility's thermal vacuum chamber, as well as a couple of rounds in the mechanical vibration facility, a simulator that subjects prototypes to forces similar to those encountered during launch. It's basically just an enormous shaker table. If the pair of spacecraft manage to survive these tests, the next step is inspections and the process of fitting the uncrewed craft into a fairing for launch, so we are very close to seeing Dream Chaser actually fly. The original idea for Dream Chaser started even further back in 2004, long before the original shuttles had been retired. It took some years before Sierra Space even entered the picture, but once they did, they very quickly modeled the Dream Chaser concept into an updated replacement for the original shuttles from 2012 onwards. Sierra Space and their partners got to work creating what we see today, creating test articles and conducting their own tests to get it flight ready. In that time, the team has created an extremely robust spaceplane with a cargo and crewed variant thermal tiles that are lighter, stronger, and more advanced than the ones on the shuttles, and multiple modules designed to attach on the rear of the craft and can inflate to form a huge habitation area or store more cargo. This cargo module is the Shooting Star, which can be used to transport both pressurized and non-pressurized payloads, and has deployable solar panels to provide extra power generation, which cargo missions occasionally require. Both Dream Chaser and its modules are made to fit inside a standard 5M fairing, a size that most conventional rockets can handle, or at least the heavy lift rockets that can actually get Dream Chaser into orbit. NASA wanted the system to work on any heavy lift rocket for redundancy, so that's why the whole thing folds up as tightly as it does. The very first flight of Dream Chaser was intended to be on the ULA's new Vulcan rocket, but delays with completing both projects caused some setbacks. Most of us are familiar with Vulcan's trouble and the Blue Origin made before engine saga, but Dream Chaser was also a bit of a handful. Those thermal tiles are so advanced that they frankly could use their own episode to cover, but just the installation of them took years. This timing was likely as much a product of the team being unfamiliar with the new tiles as it was the complexity, but it was a major factor in the construction time of the first vehicle, called Tenacity. Luckily, this slowdown made it possible to almost perfectly line up the first launches of both Vulcan and Dream Chaser, with Vulcan's first launch due to happen around January 8th after a delay caused by ground system malfunctions. The plan for this first launch is that it will take place between January and March of 2024, and will be performing a cargo run. Dream Chaser and its Shooting Star module will be mounted on the new center upper stage of a Vulcan rocket and launched into an orbit that intersects with the International Space Station. After a very careful 6-hour approach, cargo will be exchanged and the vehicles will detach and head back to the planet, with Dream Chaser gliding back to Kennedy Space Center and landing on the runway there, and Shooting Star burning up in the atmosphere with its payload of ISS garbage. Currently, the Shooting Star is made to be expendable in this way, and while the company is working on an inflatable heat shield that could one day allow for the Shooting Star to parachute safely back to the Earth for reuse, Sierra anticipates having to complete at least the first 30 launches of their 2 Dream Chaser planes with this disposable version, and so they are also busy creating a production line that can keep up with that. Have you ever wished you could learn a new language, maybe for travel, connecting with family, or just for fun? Well, I found the perfect. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a video. Chica, Texas for the next test flight of their Starship Super Heavy rocket, and a new bit of information given to us by NASA itself has shed some light on what exactly the aim of this third flight test will be. SpaceX is going for the first propellant transfer test. Propellant transfer is one of the most important functions of the Starship platform. Refueling in orbit from one Starship to another gives a huge boost to mission range, and most importantly, it's one of the requirements for NASA to sign off on using the Human Landing System variant to put one of their crews on the moon, and with a tentatively planned 2025 launch date for the Artemis 3 Starship mission, SpaceX has very little time left to do all the testing they need to complete before being certified. SpaceX is known for working fast, but a lot of pieces need to come together to make this sort of test happen. So when NASA's deputy administrator for their Moon to Mars program gave a talk to the nationally on December 4th, attendees were shocked to see that one of her slides contained a mention that Starship's next flight will include a propellant transfer demonstration. Like we said, SpaceX works fast, but they're not magicians. The FAA is currently working on their mishap investigation from If-2's explosive finished back in November, making the third test flight possibly just weeks away with only one launch pad. How is it possible that the next test flight could accomplish something as complex as a propellant transfer? Well, NASA spokesperson Jimmy Russell shed some light on this mystery for us. It's not in a conversation with news outlet Ars Technica. Jimmy clarifies NASA and SpaceX are reviewing options for the demonstration to take place during an integrated flight test of Starship and Super Heavy rocket. However, no final decisions on timing have been made, according to Jimmy. This first test will be an internal tank-to-tank exchange using the hardware already on board Starship, moving about 10 metric tons of liquid oxygen between 2 tanks inside the Starship following stage separation. This plan has actually been around since 2020 and is a fairly reasonable first attempt. It won't require a second ship, and it will test a lot of the internal system of valves and actuators needed to move the cryogenic fuel around safely in microgravity, so it might not happen just yet. And Jimmy makes it clear that if it does, it won't be the sort of test we're thinking of with 2 starships docking in orbit. That will be the end result, the last test in the series that will prove Starship can transfer fuel at full scale. SpaceX likes to test things incrementally, bit by bit, as they complete test flights, and Jimmy makes it clear that if Starship can be safely rigged for the first of its propellant transfer tests in time for the third test flight, it certainly won't be a large-scale test. It is pretty wild hearing that this might be a possibility for the next launch, even with its more reasonable scope. But SpaceX does have a lot of milestones to hit in 2024 if they are even going to attempt to stick to the 2025 launch window for Artemis 3, but who knows, maybe they can pull off a full flight and a propellant transfer in the next test. AVO, the makers of the European Space Agency Vega rockets, have a big problem. They lost 2 fuel tanks on December 4th, a source for the space flight news outlet European Spaceflight reported that in early October, AVO discovered 2 of the 4 tanks that hold fuel for Vega's Avum 4th stage had gone missing, threatening to cancel what was due to be the final flight of the ES. Its last functional rocket. It took a bit for AVO to figure out what had happened, but it seems to have been a tracking mix-up. According to a source close to the project, the 2 tanks in question had for some reason not been entered into the company's inventory system, which tracks all their launch assets. Because of this, it was difficult to even find them, let alone figure out what had happened. But the 2 tanks were eventually found crushed into a scrap metal at a nearby junkyard, apparently during some recent renovations at the AV production facility. The untagged tanks had been mistaken for garbage and were hauled off. The bigger problem is that, as previously mentioned, VIA is due to be retired after this launch, so there isn't exactly any other hardware waiting to be swapped in here. This final mission was supposed to take Europe's Sentinel-2C Earth observation satellite into orbit, a mission that the ESA regards as urgent enough to bump another satellite, a biomass forest measuring vehicle, off the docket, so they are a bit anxious to find a solution here. One such solution would be to refurbish the old fuel tanks that had been used for the AAM's qualification tests back in 2012, but to say those tanks would require a lot of work to get flight ready again is reportedly an understatement. Another option is also risky, but in a different Way AVO could take the tanks from the Vegas's AAM plus 4th stage and retrofit them to power its older, smaller sibling again. There's no way of knowing. If it will work, and it would take months of work to even try, the safest option is to wait for Vega SC to be ready to fly. Which won't be until at least late 2024, as the rocket is undergoing some fixes after a failure on its second flight in December of last year, which was caused by a faulty engine nozzle, so there doesn't seem to be a good solution here, unfortunately. And while having to wait a whole year to put an important scientific research platform into orbit is frustrating. Vega finishing its almost 12-year career this way isn't great. We'd bet AVO won't ever ignore inventory management again, that's for sure.
That's it for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. See you soon.